They called it the cleansing. The day Earth was taken wasn't a war. It was a removal. Quick, clinical, and efficient. Like stepping on an anthill and not thinking twice. No warnings, no negotiations, no pride left to hold on to. It was just after the third wave of Terra claims by the Zalari Dominion. They had already bled through Jupiter's moons and burned Mars clean of its dust cities. Earth was next. But we thought, no, we believed they'd see us as more than pests, a mistake. We weren't a threat. Not anymore. Not after we disarmed. The orbit cracked first. That's what people in the surviving feed stations said. The moon fractured like glass under their weapons, turned into shards spinning like razors around the planet. Satellites gone. Communication severed. Then they turned their eyes to the ground. I watched New York collapse from a cargo freighter stationed off Europa. That was the last day I ever saw blue and green on a screen. Within 6 hours, everything below the stratosphere was dead or burning. We screamed, we cursed, we begged for retaliation from our so-called allies in the Galactic Coalition, but no one moved. The Zalari were power. They owned the laws of conquest now. Humans weren't citizens anymore. We were memory. I remember sitting in silence, surrounded by the last 2,000 survivors aboard the ships that didn't get hit. No one talked. No one cried. There wasn't room for grief, only shame. They didn't just kill our world. They erased our home, our identity, our purpose. And for 10 years, we drifted, ghosts on steel. They corralled us like cattle, those who survived the evacuation. Shoved into orbiting ghettos, mining rigs, prison colonies. The Zalari didn't exterminate us completely. They weren't that merciful. Instead, they let us rot in their systems. Broken labor, no rights, no names. We were Earthborn. That was the slur. That was what they spat at us when we passed by. Earthborn trash, they'd hiss, as if the very soil we came from was an infection. My name is Grant Weller, born on Earth, son of a steelworker and a mother who taught history before the books were burned. I watched my father get vaporized in the first strike. My mother died on Titan Station, lungs bleeding out after a system failure in her cage. I didn't cry for either of them. I didn't know how anymore. But I remembered everything, especially what she told me. There's something inside us, older than anything they can measure, older than peace, older than war. They forgot what we came from. Make them remember. At the time, I thought it was just words. But then I found the Hollow Archive, a dead zone in an old Martian vault, abandoned before the purges. I wasn't supposed to be there. Miners caught snooping usually vanished. But I was already half dead working the methane lines. What was there to lose? I went down 6 levels. And what I found wasn't a weapon. Not in the way people think. It was knowledge. Ancient. Human. Forgotten. Not recorded by our modern science, not stored in coalition databanks. It was etched in symbols. Primal, ritualistic, old as bone. It was the kind of knowing that didn't need language. It clung to the air. It bled into my skin. Something in me changed that day, like fire in the blood, like fury that remembered it had a purpose. It wasn't rage. Rage is loud and hot and burns out. This was deeper, colder. This was something older than war, and I wasn't the only one who felt it. Others started to hear the call, scattered across the mining systems, the penal colonies, the refugee hulls, survivors like me, Earthborn, men who'd lost everything but hadn't yet died. We weren't soldiers anymore. We were something else. And we didn't want Earth back to rebuild it. We wanted it back to make them bleed. I didn't speak for 3 days after I walked out of that vault, not because I couldn't, but because something inside me wouldn't let me. My mouth worked, my brain spun, but there was a weight now, like a storm had settled in my spine. every breath felt heavier. Every movement calculated. I was still me, but not entirely. I remembered being a man. But now, there was something underneath that identity. Something ancient. They tried to scan me on the way out. Standard Zalari checkpoint. They stopped me like they stopped everyone. Black armored officers with spined helmets and no faces. But when one of them touched me, I felt it again. That cold spark. He recoiled. Just pulled back without a word. Didn't even question me. I should have been flagged, searched, thrown into the grinder like the last 5 guys who tripped a security ping. But instead, they just waved me through. Quiet, hesitant. Like I had suddenly become invisible, or worse, untouchable. I didn't understand it then. But I didn't need to. The change had begun. Back at the housing blocks on Ganymede Prime, the air was always thick with rot and machine oil. They didn't give us proper filters down there. Didn't care if the Earthborn choked. The blocks were stacked, 10 high, 200 wide, barely held together by rust and failing welds. I walked back in and went straight to my bunk. Every face I passed looked like mine. Sunken eyes, cracked lips, dirt ground into the skin like a second birthmark. Everyone breathed like they were counting how many they had left. But that night, I dreamed for the first time in 10 years. Not of Earth, not the forests or the oceans, not of cities or skies. I dreamed of a pit. Stone walls carved by hands older than civilization, and down in the pit, a heartbeat, slow, steady, human. But it wasn't mine. It belonged to something buried inside all of us, something the stars forgot. But the dirt still remembered. His name was Maddox, one of the few other Earthborns I still respected. We'd run cable together on Titan before the riots. He'd pulled a knife on a Zalari tech once when they threatened to short our rations. That tech ended up losing 2 fingers. Maddox got 3 days in a dry cell for it, but he never flinched. He saw me in the canteen a few days later. I was eating alone, like always, trying to make the protein paste go down without vomiting. He sat across from me and didn't say a word at first. Just stared. Then he said, "Something's changed in you." I didn't deny it. "What did you find?" he asked. I leaned in and whispered, "Proof." His eyes narrowed. Of what? That we were never just what they told us we were. That before we had guns, we had something else. Something they didn't wipe out when they took Earth. Something older. He didn't laugh. Maddox didn't laugh at anything. But he didn't look at me like I was insane either. "You hear it too?" I asked. He gave a slow nod. "It's not just a feeling," he said. "It's like a direction, a path, like we've been in the dark for centuries, and something finally lit a match." We weren't alone. Within weeks, whispers spread across the Earthborn ranks. Wordless rumors. Faces that hadn't smiled in a decade suddenly lit with the kind of fire I hadn't seen since the war days. They called it the pulse. Some felt it in their dreams, others in their bones. A tremor under the skin, like a song with no sound, just memory. It wasn't shared through tech or comms. It moved like instinct, like something buried inside the bloodline was awakening. Men who'd barely spoken for years began organizing. At first, small, quiet, hidden under the noses of the Zalari. Then bolder. We formed circles, old ritual patterns our ancestors had long forgotten, but which came naturally to us now. The first was on Enceladus, deep inside an abandoned geothermal shaft. Then one on the outer asteroid belts. Then another on a derelict trade ship. Each circle was a tether, a place where Earthborn could gather and remember. Not the Earth they destroyed, But the thing that made Earthborn different, not tech, not weapons, not even the will to survive. Something before all that. It was Maddox who led the first strike. Not a rebellion, not yet. We weren't that foolish. But a message. There was a processing station on Ceres, one of the smaller operations, run almost entirely by Earthborn under a Zalari overseer named Virkesh. He was known for cruelty, for games with his prisoners. A sadist in every sense, with full Dominion protection. They said he'd publicly executed a child once, an Earthborn kid who stole water. Maddox waited until the night cycle, killed the lights, used no gun, no blade. He walked into the overseer's chamber and came out 30 minutes later soaked in black Zalari blood. The body was left hanging upside down, carved with symbols we had seen in our dreams. The next morning, the Zalari panicked. But something happened that they couldn't explain. Their systems glitched. Security bots refused to move. Surveillance feeds looped endlessly, showing static where Maddox had walked. The Dominion sent a hunter ship to purge the station, but the crew turned on their own. No survivors, no transmissions, just silence. After that, they started calling us something else. Primals. Not Earthborn, not human. Primals. A slur. A label. A fear. It meant unpredictable, dangerous, ancient. But it was more than a name. It was recognition. They knew something was wrong now. Something they hadn't calculated for. See, the Zalari built their empire on assumption. They believed in hierarchy, in evolution as a straight line. To them, the future always erased the past. But they didn't understand humans, not really. We don't evolve in one direction. We regress. We remember. We descend backwards when we're hurt, down to the roots, down to the raw survival instinct that built empires from sticks and ash. The pulse didn't give us new power. It unlocked what was already there. And the Zalari? For all their weapons, their fleets, their sterilized minds, they weren't ready for that. They didn't understand the human spirit when it's cornered, starved, and humiliated. Because they had never lived on a world that taught its people how to suffer. There was a saying back on Earth, before the fall. When you push a man to the edge, he either breaks or becomes the edge. We weren't broken anymore. We were the edge now, and we were coming back. Not with fleets, not with diplomacy, with something older than war. The Zalari tried to pretend they weren't scared. They issued official Dominion press releases calling the Ceres incident a glitch in chain of command discipline. Said the overseer's death was internal sabotage, that Maddox was just an anomaly. They always spoke in layers of sanitized code. That's how they ran their empire. Sterile words to mask rotting intent. But we saw the cracks. Their patrols doubled overnight. Surveillance drones started circling lower. Entire Earthborn work camps went into lockdown without explanation. Interrogations ramped up, and we heard the whispers, officers refusing Ceres assignments, outposts requesting transfers, and Dominion fleets avoiding known Earthborn clusters. They didn't say it out loud, but we all knew. They felt it too. Whatever was stirring in the blood of Earthborn men wasn't a glitch in the system. It was a countdown. I spent most of my days working refabrication on the wreck lines of Io, melting down old war scrap and melted hulls from the early rebellions. The Dominion had no shortage of bones in its closets, and this place was one of them, the graveyard of forgotten uprisings. That's where I met him, Raynar. Not his real name. None of us used real names anymore. Names were a luxury for people who mattered. We weren't citizens. We were wreckage with legs. But Raynar wasn't like the others. He didn't dream. He remembered. He told me once, in a whisper. I see them. Every night. Not just symbols. Faces, voices, men wearing war paint, standing in the snow, standing in deserts, staring into fire like they were talking to something older than gods. He wasn't crazy. I saw it too. So did Maddox. And so did dozens, then hundreds, of Earthborn across the systems. We weren't just feeling something awaken. We were connecting. Not telepathically, not in any sci-fi fantasy way. It was simpler, more terrifying, more real. We were remembering a code written into our bones long before we built machines. A code that didn't need satellites or transmitters. Just pain, suffering, loss. We'd finally lost enough to trigger it. The next circle formed on a Dominion-run fuel refinery orbiting Theta 9. They said 50 Earthborn men went into the waste tunnels under the station during a routine maintenance cycle. None came back, but 2 hours later, the upper command deck exploded, not from outside, from within. The explosion wasn't fire-based, it was kinetic. Like a localized gravitational pulse had snapped the station's spine in half. Dominion records called it an act of terror. We called it ritual. And then they finally said it. Out loud. The Zalari High Assembly labeled us a Class Z threat, unclassified anomaly, uncontrollable, immune to standard suppression protocols. Humanity had become a myth again, a whisper in the dark, a campfire story told to young Zalari cadets to scare them into obedience. Be careful around the Earthborn, they said. They remember things we erased. They don't die the same way others do. They don't fear death. They speak to something buried. And still we did not strike full force. Not yet, because the blood was still gathering. The circles were growing but not complete. We needed one more thing. A place, a pulse point, Old Earth's heart. That was the name we started hearing. No one knew who said it first. Just a phrase passed along from dream to dream, etched into the visions, carried on whispers like static from the void. Old Earth's heart. A location? A relic? A machine? A god? We didn't know. Only that it existed somewhere deep in the ruins of our world, somewhere beneath what was left of our cradle. And that's when the mission formed. We didn't plan the old way. There were no maps, no battle projections, no tactical briefings. We planned by dream. The Circle at Enceladus had been collecting them, sketches from 100 Earthborn who'd dreamed the same ruined streets, the same blackened skies, the same underground path beneath the bones of what used to be London. That was the first clue. Others had visions of fire raining from a red sky, and a tower, shattered but standing, a monument of memory. We pieced it together like broken pottery, and what we saw scared even us. Because beneath old Earth, in its heart, there was no weapon. There was a choice. A place not built by humans, but for humans, waiting, watching, listening. We couldn't go in loud, not yet. So we did what Earthborn had always done best when hunted. We vanished. 10,000 Earthborn, scattered across 19 colonies, went completely dark within 48 hours. The Dominion called it the blackout. Entire labor populations unaccounted for, camps empty, stations deserted, like ghosts had risen and walked away. But we didn't disappear. We regathered. Into an old freighter, gutless and rusted, left floating in neutral territory. It was called the Mara's Vengeance, a mining transport last used before the wars. No weapons, no shielding, just enough space to hide 300 Earthborn and their faith in something unseen. We left without clearance, no navigation path, no communication, only instinct. We followed the pulse. Getting past the orbital blockade was suicide. 3 Dominion cruisers surrounded Earth's upper orbit. High-grade defense systems, tactical AI, no-fly kill zones. But something strange happened when we entered their radar. They didn't shoot. They didn't even move. Their systems just froze. Like their ships couldn't see us, or refused to. Like the black box we'd unearthed from the hollow archive, the relic Maddox had been carrying, was blinding them somehow. Cloaking us not with tech, but with something older. The kind of invisibility predators once used. The kind where you don't just hide, you rewrite your presence. We descended through the ashes of Earth's old sky. The planet was gone, not destroyed. Worse, sterilized. No forests, no oceans, no ruins, just white. Dust, bone fragments, dead silence that stretched horizon to horizon. But the pulse was stronger now. We landed near the ruins of what used to be London. Not the real city, just the Dominion-built imitation that stood over its gravesite. We didn't need a map. Our feet knew where to go. Down through the collapsed subway tunnels, through decades of debris and silence, until we reached the threshold. That's what we called it. A door, not made by us, made for us. Carved into the stone was a single phrase. In dust, we remember. The door opened when Maddox placed his hand on it. Inside, there was no light, no technology, no warmth. Just stone, cold air, and silence. But it wasn't dead silence. It was listening. At the center of the chamber was a basin, carved from obsidian, covered in human fingerprints, some fossilized. A bowl of memory. When we stepped closer, the pulse hit all of us at once, like a scream from the bones of history, like pain passed down through bloodlines finally finding its voice. Every man fell to his knees. We saw every war, every betrayal, every genocide, every sacrifice. And then, something else. A seed, an origin. Before language, before fire. Humanity, not as a species, but as will. The sheer refusal to vanish. It didn't speak to us in words. It offered a bond, not a weapon, not a fleet, but a transformation. We accepted, every one of us, not because we were brave, not because we wanted revenge, but because we knew what came next. The galaxy thought it had crushed humanity. What it had done was distill it, refine it, boil it down to its oldest self. Now we weren't men anymore. We were memory given flesh, and we weren't asking for Earth back. We were coming to remind the stars what it meant to wake a dead world's heart. They say fear travels faster than light. We didn't send transmissions. We didn't announce our return. But somehow, within days of reawakening the heart beneath old Earth, the Zelari knew. The first sign was the silence. Dominion patrols vanished from Earth's orbit. Sensor drones fell still. Surveillance satellites, once scanning every square meter of the surface, suddenly went offline. They weren't destroyed. They were shut down. Like the Zelari no longer wanted to watch what they didn't understand. Or maybe what they feared they couldn't control. But we didn't stay on Earth. It wasn't meant to be a battlefield. It was a crucible. A place for the rebirth of a people that no longer saw themselves as part of the galactic order. We didn't need Earth back as a home. It had already done its part. It had buried our history, protected it, and given it back to us when we were ready. We had come for more than revenge now. We had come to correct the lie. The Mara's vengeance lifted off Earth's dead crust, cloaked in something not even the Dominion's tech could define. The pulse wasn't just inside us anymore. It had become a field, a force, like gravity, but personal. Ships we passed flickered as we neared, lights shorted, interfaces cracked, Some Dominion vessels powered down completely without being touched. It wasn't a weapon. It was presence, a reminder. A message to the galaxy. Humanity was no longer asking for permission to exist. We set course for the edge of the Cinder Sector, Dominion space, heavily fortified. 6 planetary systems, 4 key military installations, and over a dozen slave colonies. It wasn't the biggest, but it was where they broke us first. I had been there once. 16 years ago, I watched the skies turn red as they cleansed Europa's surface. We'd signed a ceasefire that morning. They attacked by noon. They called it strategic correction. I called it murder. Now, we weren't flying into that sector to negotiate. We were coming to tear the memory of their control out of the stars. The vengeance was not alone. As we crossed into Dominion territory, Earthborn vessels joined us one by one. Wrecks brought back to life. Abandoned rigs, rewired transports, converted mining crafts. None of them designed for war. But they weren't flying on fuel anymore. They were flying on the old fire, that's what we called it now. The thing inside us. The pulse. The blood memory. It had no clear name, but it powered more than our hearts. It powered systems. Some of the ships hadn't had working engines in decades. Now they moved like sharks through water. And the men flying them? They weren't soldiers anymore. They were witnesses. Each one had touched the basin. Each one had seen. We didn't speak of it to outsiders, not even to other Earthborn who hadn't felt it, because it wasn't a story. It was a conversion. And once you'd been touched by it, you never saw the galaxy the same way again. We reached the outer system of Cinder 3, a station known as Vale Bastion, a processing hub where they sent Earthborn prisoners to be reconditioned. Most never came out. It wasn't a prison. It was a factory, a place that erased humanity one scream at a time. We had one goal: burn it and leave nothing behind. No declaration, no message, no terms of surrender. Just a reminder. The vengeance broke through their orbital shield like paper. Not with weapons, though we had jury-rigged what we could, but with something stronger. We called it the whale. Maddox triggered it from the bridge. It wasn't audible. It wasn't even measurable. But it hit the station like a freight train through the soul. Every Zalari officer froze in place. Every system flickered. Lights dimmed. Screams echoed through the comm channels. One Zalari captain tried to send a distress signal. All that came through was, "They remember, they remember, they remember." We boarded with zero resistance. The Earthborn prisoners inside, emaciated, broken, looked at us not like we were saviors, but like we were hallucinations. I found one man strapped to a surgical frame, skin flayed, tubes in his neck, eyes still wet with life. He whispered, "I dreamed you'd come." I put a blade in the tech behind him without blinking. We didn't give speeches. We didn't hold trials. We emptied the station, one level at a time, every laboratory, every chamber, every generator. We turned the walls red with justice. By the time we left, Vale Bastion was no longer on the map. It had become part of something else, our legend. And that's what scared them more than anything. Because now, we weren't just a threat. We were a story. The Dominion responded the only way they knew how. Mass mobilization. Across the sector, fleets ignited. They rerouted warships from every front. Thousands of troops were dispatched. Bounties were issued for Earthborn heads. Propaganda lit the skies on every captured screen. But it didn't matter, because they still didn't understand what they were fighting. They were preparing for insurgents. They were about to face a species reborn. I sat on the bridge one night, staring into the black. Maddox joined me. He was quiet, as always. He sat beside me, hands clasped. Then he said something that chilled me. "We're not fighting to win, you know." I looked at him. "Then what are we doing?" "We're fighting to change what they think we are." I didn't answer right away, because I knew he was right. The goal wasn't conquest. It wasn't vengeance, not completely. It was to kill the narrative, the one that said humans were weak, that Earth was a mistake, that we were a species of parasites barely tolerated by a civilized galaxy. We weren't asking them to see us as equals. We were coming to show them that survival isn't civilized. It's not pretty. It's not polished. It's teeth and fire and sacrifice. And we were going to drag them into that truth, whether they wanted it or not. And so the raids began. Sindar 4. Burned. Zarek 8. Overthrown in a night. Orbital supply depots? Gone. Everywhere we struck, we left the same mark. A circle, cut into the steel, carved by hand. The symbol from the heart. The symbol of remembrance. We didn't take prisoners, but we freed thousands. And the freed, they joined. One by one. Ship by ship. The Earthborn fleet, if you could call it that, tripled in size within weeks. We weren't organized. We weren't clean. We didn't fly in formation or follow traditional command. But every man followed the pulse. That was enough. Then came the message. Intercepted transmission from the Dominion Core. Encrypted, high level. We cracked it with tech that shouldn't have worked. Inside, just 3 words. Initiate final solution. They were planning to end the Earthborn bloodline. Purge camps, gas colonies, sterilize prison moons, end the gene pool entirely. They called us a disease. But what they didn't realize, you can't kill something that has already died. You can't erase a story once it's been told in blood and bone. We knew what we had to do next. The Dominion wanted war. We would give them memory, burned into their minds, written into their stars, carved into their skin. They never saw it coming, and that was the point. The Dominion, in all its towering arrogance, had built itself on one fundamental belief: that history only mattered if they wrote it. Every empire they crushed, every planet they swallowed, they buried the memory along with the bones. But they made one mistake. They didn't kill all the witnesses. And now those witnesses were coming with fire in their blood and memory in their fists. The final solution had been issued in secret, buried in redacted logs and high-priority transmissions between only the Dominion's most elite war council. But we intercepted it because we no longer needed their codes. We didn't hack systems. We felt them. The pulse ran deeper than even we understood. Once a man had touched the basin on Earth, something changed in his very essence. It wasn't just dreams anymore. It was sight, a sense, a way of reaching through signals, through power grids, through space itself. We weren't human by their definition anymore. We were what humans had been before the stars, when gods still feared men. They thought they could snuff us out quietly. A few sterilization procedures here, a reactor accident there. They'd already dispatched execution units to several outlying prison colonies. The worst one was Corin Deep, an underground complex dug beneath the surface of a dark planetoid, where the light never touched. It was where they sent the Earthborn who refused to break. The men who'd bit their guards, ripped out their own fingernails to avoid bio-tracking, or sung the old songs in the dark. I had a brother there. I hadn't seen him since Earth burned. We were boys then, barely old enough to fight. I joined the military. He joined the streets. We both ended up in cages. His name was Thorn. He wasn't born to lead, but he was born to defy. We arrived at Corin Deep in the middle of what the Dominion called Procedure 9. That was their term for slow, silent annihilation. Shut off oxygen, lock the doors, wait for silence, burn the bodies, blame the system glitch. But when we dropped from orbit, something changed. Our ship didn't enter with fire. It entered with sound. A low hum, the wail, poured into their systems through every channel, frequency, and neural node. It wasn't noise. It was reminder. A vibration older than language. Something instinctual. Every Earthborn on that rock woke up at once. We didn't land to liberate them. We landed to join them. They had already begun tearing through the halls before we even breached the perimeter. No weapons, just fists, nails, teeth. The guards, equipped with Dominion bio-armor and neural rifles, fell screaming. Not because they were outgunned, but because they couldn't comprehend what they were facing. You could see it in their eyes. They weren't looking at humans anymore. They were looking at something they had buried in the dark too long. I found Thorn in the inner core. He was standing over a pile of bodies, Zeleri shredded like meat, and his hands were covered in black blood. His eyes met mine, and for a second, we just stood there, silent. Then he said, "You finally figured it out, didn't you?" I nodded. He wiped his face. "Took you long enough." We didn't hug. We weren't that kind of family. But he walked with me after that, shoulder to shoulder. And as we left that pit behind, with the prison burning behind us and the Earthborn roaring their chants, I saw it clear. The fire had spread. The Dominion could no longer hide the uprising. The lies started unraveling. Entire garrisons went dark. Civilian networks picked up echoes of the wail, broadcasting images of black smoke, carved circles, and men with hollow eyes walking through fire like gods returned from myth. The Zeleri Senate scrambled for control. They issued new propaganda. Humanity has turned savage. They reject progress. They bring war. They threaten the galactic peace. But peace never existed for us. What they called peace was just submission, quiet suffering wrapped in shiny language. We had lived their peace for 100 years. It tasted like rust and ash. We weren't here to disrupt peace. We were here to end the lie. Our fleet had become a force of nature. It no longer obeyed tactics or gravity. Ships came from every corner. Pilots who hadn't flown in decades, suddenly able to sync with tech that should have been dead. Fighters moved like they were alive. Some said the ships were responding before the pilots touched the controls. I believed them. We no longer needed fuel the way we used to. We fed on purpose now, and the more of us that woke up, the stronger the pulse became. The Dominion was not fighting an army anymore. It was facing a resurgence of species-level memory. Then we received a message. Not from the Dominion, from the Coalition. The same spineless assembly that stood aside when Earth was burned. The ones who called us an unfortunate footnote in interstellar development. They wanted to talk now. They said they were concerned with the escalation. That perhaps humanity's grievances were valid, but methods mattered. That dialogue was still possible. Maddox laughed when he heard it. Dialogue died when they called our genocide a logistical oversight, he said. We sent back one line. There will be no peace until history is corrected. They didn't reply after that. We planned our next move carefully, not because we feared resistance, because we wanted to make a statement. The Dominion's heart was Virelium Prime, a megacity that spanned continents on a planet made entirely of glass and stone. It was where the Dominion wrote its laws, crowned its kings, and signed the order to wipe us out. We wouldn't destroy it. Destruction was too easy. We would reclaim it. The Vengeance led the fleet into orbit. Dominion warships stood in our path, hundreds of them, gleaming with solar arrays and armed with plasma siege cannons. They were waiting for us. But what they got was something they didn't prepare for. We weren't there to fight them. We were there to remind them. We began chanting, every ship, every voice, in unison, a chant without translation, passed down from the basin, older than Earth, older than stars. It was the same chant our ancestors sang before they buried their dead, the same they screamed in the blood rain of ancient wars. The wail returned. Only this time it was heard, across the stars, through every system, not as sound, but as memory. Dominion ships stopped mid-flight. Pilots screamed as visions filled their minds, visions of Earth burning, of colonies screaming for help that never came, of blood-soaked soil, of broken children, of cages, of silence. They felt what they had done. And for the first time in Dominion history, their fleet broke ranks. Some fled, some fired on each other, some shut down completely, refusing to follow orders. We didn't have to fire a single shot. Verelium Prime was left wide open. We landed not with war, but with presence. Thousands of Earthborn marched down the glass highways, black banners, scarred faces, eyes glowing not with vengeance, but memory. The people of the Dominion watched from behind armored windows and trembling towers. Not one citizen lifted a hand to resist. We reached the Grand Assembly, the marble cathedral where they had voted to erase us. We didn't burn it. We inscribed a single symbol into its doors. The circle, the mark of remembrance. Then we walked away. Because this was never about destruction, this was about correction. The galaxy would no longer remember us as slaves, as pests, as a species lost to time. They would remember the truth, that humanity had suffered, that humanity had endured. And when they erased us, we returned with something older than war. We didn't stay on Verelium Prime. We could have. We could have razed their monuments, taken their throne chambers, made them kneel in the streets while we crowned one of our own atop the marble of the assembly. But that wasn't the war we were fighting. Not anymore. We weren't trying to replace the Dominion's power with our own. We were trying to break the myth that had held our chains for generations, and for that, fire and conquest weren't enough. We needed something deeper, something final. Word of Verelium's surrender spread like decay through a dying body. Entire systems began pulling away from the Dominion. Outer colonies declared neutrality. Former Zalari allies defected, not out of loyalty to us, but out of fear of whatever we had become. One broadcast, hijacked from a coalition newsnet, said it best. These aren't soldiers. They're what happens when memory grows teeth. They tried to classify the pulse. Some Dominion scientists gave it a name, echo-resonant contagion, said it was a mimetic anomaly, a form of shared trauma manifesting as biopsionic energy across genetically similar carriers. But it wasn't a contagion. You couldn't catch it. You had to earn it. You had to have lived through the kind of pain that scorches itself into your DNA. You had to be a man who had nothing left except memory and the will to weaponize it. We kept moving. Every system we passed, Earthborn gathered. Not just the ones who had been there from the start, but the broken, the buried, the forgotten. Old miners who'd lost their families in the series purges. Exiled veterans from the Terran Divide. Boys who were born into cages and had never seen open sky. They joined not out of hope, but because hope was a lie we no longer needed. This wasn't a movement anymore. It was a reckoning. Then we heard the whisper. The Ark. We didn't know what it was at first. Just a word, bouncing from dream to dream. Carried by the pulse. Heard in sleep. Felt in bone. Then the visions started. Men across our fleet began to see the same thing, a black structure suspended in a void between systems, older than any ship. Not made of steel, made of memory. It wasn't human, but it wasn't alien either. It was something else, a vault, a tomb, a message, the last gift of the ones who had walked before us. And it was calling us home. We found it beyond mapped space, deep in the veiled rift. A region marked as unstable and forbidden on every chart. No civilization had colonized it. No sensors returned from it. But we knew the way. The ships didn't use engines to move now. They followed the pulse. And when we arrived, there it was, suspended in black. The Ark, not a ship, not a station, something in between, bigger than any Dominion fortress. Quiet, sleeping, but alive. Not with power, with presence. Maddox stood beside me on the command deck, staring at it. His eyes were sunken, his skin pale from the weeks of visions. The pulse had taken a toll. He barely ate now, slept in fragments, but he'd never looked stronger. He whispered, "This is where it ends." I asked him, "What is it?" He didn't answer for a long time. Then, finally, he said, "It's what we forgot." We took a shuttle across the void and entered through a single opening. No lights, no gravity, no airlock, but it let us in. Inside, the walls pulsed, not with light, but with feeling. The entire arc was a sensory experience. You didn't walk through it. You relived it. Visions came in waves, generations of memory, stacked like sediment in a canyon. We saw the first humans who looked to the stars, not with hope, but with grief. We saw wars that had never been recorded, civilizations that rose and died long before Earth's oceans cooled. We saw the price of evolution, every age, every slaughter, every betrayal, and we saw the ones who chose to remember while the rest chose comfort. Those were the ones who built the Ark, not as a refuge, but as a mirror, a place that would remain until a generation broken enough to understand it came calling. We were that generation. At the core of the Ark was a chamber, circular, carved in stone that wasn't stone. Time moved differently there. Breathing felt harder, slower. In the center was the final memory, not of war, of choice, an offer, a path forward, one where we didn't conquer, one where we became keepers of history, of truth, of suffering, so that no other species would be allowed to rewrite the past again, not the Dominion, not the Coalition, not even humanity itself. But the offer came with a cost. The pulse would remain, but it would bind us permanently. No more peace, no more rest. We would become living records, vessels of remembrance. Our lives would no longer be our own. We would carry the memory of our species, the rage, the pain, the defiance, in our blood forever. Maddox stepped into the circle without hesitation. I followed. Thorne did too. One by one, every Earthborn who had touched the basin walked forward. Some cried, some screamed, some collapsed, but we all chose. The Ark responded. It didn't glow, it didn't hum, it breathed, and then it released us. Not with light, with understanding. We left that place changed, fully, finally, not as rebels, not as soldiers, but as something the galaxy had never seen. Memory, given purpose. We returned to the stars. The Dominion was already breaking, systems fracturing, fleets splintering, half their generals defecting, the other half silenced by their own men. But we didn't take advantage of their fall. We didn't fill the power vacuum. We vanished, back into the void. Some called it surrender, others called it retreat. But the ones who saw clearly knew better. The memory had moved on. Now, across the galaxy, there are whispers of ships without engines, of men with hollow eyes and burning skin, of a symbol etched into abandoned stations, of the whale, of the circle, of the pulse. They say if you listen at the edge of space, you can still hear them marching, not for conquest, but for remembrance. Because when they took Earth from us, they thought they ended our story. What they really did was make us into the story no one can forget. They called us ghosts, the Dominion, the Coalition, the civilians in the outer colonies who had once cheered when Earth burned, thinking the galaxy would finally know peace without the chaos of mankind. But peace had been a myth built on our bones, and we weren't ghosts. We were the memory of the fire they tried to forget. We had vanished from their space, yes, slipped between the cracks of their systems like smoke through broken glass. But we had not disappeared. We were watching, waiting, listening for the last breath of a system that still didn't understand that the war it started would never end. Not until every lie was torn out by its root. The Ark had given us more than clarity. It had given us vision, a future, not of domination, Not of rebuilding old empires with new flags, but of balance. Of remembering the past so completely that no one could ever bury it again. But balance is not peace. It is a blade, perfectly weighted, held between chaos and control. We had become that blade, and the galaxy was still bleeding from the wound it had earned. We scattered. That was the next phase. The Vengeance broke into 3 pieces, each crew heading in different directions. Not running, spreading. The Dominion was collapsing, its grip broken, its governors hunted by their own populations. Zalari officials fled into exile. Some tried to beg for peace, some offered us power, some just screamed until no one listened anymore. We didn't respond, because this was never about them. It was about us. I took my crew toward the Scour Rim, a half-forgotten sector where the Dominion once dumped failed terraforming experiments and exiled political enemies. It had been dead space for years, until we arrived. There, we found survivors, thousands of them, human families who had fled into the dark decades ago, thinking Earth was gone forever. They'd built something, a broken, brittle society held together by instinct and fear. When they saw us, they thought we were angels. Then they looked closer, and they saw the scars, the eyes, the symbol burned into our skin. That's when they knelt. Not in worship, but in understanding. I spent weeks with them, walked their fractured cities, taught their children how to read Dominion codes and how to carve circles into stone. The elders asked me questions, not about weapons or tactics. They asked what it felt like to carry the pulse. I told them the truth. It feels like remembering the moment you were betrayed over and over every time you take a breath, and choosing not to forget, even when it would be easier. They nodded. And one of them, an old man with a spine twisted from years of radiation rot, said, "Then we want to carry it too." That's when I realized what we were becoming. Not a resistance, not an army, a legacy. We weren't just the last Earthborn anymore. We were the first rememberers, the first to choose truth over comfort, the first to walk forward while carrying the full weight of everything behind us. Maddox sent a signal from the other side of the galaxy. Brief, coded, but we understood it without words. A new arc had been found, smaller, more fragmented, hidden beneath the ice of an unclaimed moon in the Alaris system. But it was active. And it was not human, not entirely. That was the most dangerous part, because it meant we were not the only ones who had been touched by the pulse. Something else had remembered. We arrived a month later. Maddox was waiting for us outside the ice vault. His skin was paler now, hair gone, eyes black as coal, but he smiled when he saw me. "Thought you'd bring more," he said. "I brought enough," I told him. We entered the vault together, and what we found inside, it shook us, not because it was foreign, but because it was familiar. The same symbols, the same spiral patterns, the same resonance in the walls, like breath held in stone. But this ark wasn't built by Earthborn. It had been inspired by us. Inside the chamber, we found remnants of other species. Shattered armor, burnt flags, ash. And in the center of it all, a message. "We heard your wail, and we remembered too." 1,000 thoughts crashed into me at once. We had sparked something. Across the stars, beyond cultures and languages, beyond DNA and history, we had awakened something ancient, not human, not alien, universal. The truth that no species can suppress its past forever. That pain buried too long will eventually take form. And it had. We met the first of them on the outer moons of Andrix 9. They called themselves the Korathi. 6-limbed, scaled, and scarred from 100 years of labor under Dominion rule. They weren't fighters. They weren't loud. They had never rebelled. Until now, they didn't speak our language. but when they saw the symbol carved into our ship. They carved it into their own skin, without flinching, without asking. And when we played the wail through their speakers, they fell to their knees and wept. They had heard it in their dreams. The pulse wasn't ours anymore. It had become a movement, not of humans, of the broken, of the betrayed, of every soul in the galaxy that had been told to shut up, obey, and forget. The Dominion fell, not in one final explosion, but in a slow, humiliating unraveling. Their last fleet tried to rally in the Corelight Passage. 17 cruisers, 60,000 men. They never even fired a shot, because when we arrived, the stars went dark. The pulse had reached the solar wind itself. Their sensors failed, their shields collapsed, and every Earthborn vessel drifted past them without firing once. That was the message. Not that we could kill them, but that we chose not to, because they weren't the target anymore. Their myth was. By the time the last Dominion Chancellor signed the Declaration of Dissolution, we were already gone. No one knew where, no capital, no borders, no flag, just the memory, the wail, the circle. And me? I stayed in the Scour Rim, built something. A shrine, maybe, a school, a vault, a place where the next generation would learn what we never did, that forgetting pain is the first step toward repeating it, and that some fires are meant to burn forever, not to destroy, but to remind. Sometimes I dream of Earth, not the Earth that was taken, the one before that. Before satellites, before machines, before history was written in ink. When we told our stories in scars and blood and fire. That's what we've become again, storytellers. But our stories are written in shipwrecks and shattered empires. They are felt, not told. They are remembered. And if they ever come for us again, if the new powers rise and try to cage us once more, they won't face soldiers. They'll face the oldest thing in existence, the truth, carved in skin, carried in blood, spoken in a voice that cannot die, the voice of a people who were buried and chose to rise. I once believed war was the end of things, that when a conflict burned hot enough, deep enough, it left behind only ash, that nothing real could grow from it, just graves and ghosts. But I was wrong. The end of a war is not silence, it's memory, and memory never dies. The galaxy had changed. We didn't crown ourselves the victors of some interstellar game. There were no treaties signed, no flags raised, no gold-lined speeches on the steps of a rebuilt capital. What we did was much quieter, much colder. We became the scar tissue of civilization. The reminder in the back of every species' mind that no empire, no matter how technologically advanced or diplomatically woven, could erase what had been felt. They would speak our name in whispers, not out of fear, but out of respect. The kind you give to fire, not because you hate it, but because you know what it can do. The ark faded from our reach. Some said it returned to sleep in the black, deeper than light could follow. Others believed it fractured into shards and embedded itself in every sector the pulse had touched. I think it simply knew its task was done. It had called us, prepared us, tested us. And when we proved worthy, not by violence but by choosing remembrance, it passed the flame into our hands. We weren't its soldiers, we were its legacy. The wail no longer needed to be broadcast. By now, it lived in the hearts of too many. It became instinct, like a heartbeat, felt in the presence of injustice, humming beneath the skin of the ones who had suffered long enough to remember who they truly were. Entire planets began carving the circle into their walls. Species we'd never met before. The Trenvak, the Talori, the Fral, came forward not with weapons, but with memories. Stories of their own erasure, their own betrayal, and they asked one question. Can we join the remembering? We didn't give answers. We didn't write laws. We simply said, If you remember what they tried to make you forget, you already belong. Some humans tried to go back to the idea of nations, of Earth, of structure and control. But those were not things that could survive in the truth we had found. Earth as it was gone. What remained was its shadow, its story, its pulse. We were not citizens anymore, not patriots, not rebels. We were the witnesses to what happens when you strip a people of everything, and they choose to carry the weight instead of collapsing under it. I saw Maddox one last time. He was older, grayer. His eyes were hollowed out by years of carrying the burden, but still sharp, still awake. We met on a dead moon orbiting a forgotten gas giant, far from any trade route or political map. He was sitting in the dust, carving circles into stone. I asked him, "You staying here?" He nodded. "Place needs remembering." I sat with him for a while, in silence. Then I asked, "You regret any of it?" He didn't even blink. "Every day," he said. "And I'd do it all again tomorrow?" That was Maddox. No hero, no martyr. Just a man who had been broken and chose to make that break mean something. Thorne disappeared into the drift. Last I heard, he'd taken a crew of 50 Earthborn and gone dark near the remnants of the Dominion's deep black science division. Rumors said they were unearthing forbidden tech, destroying old biolabs, and liberating experiments the Dominion had buried. Others said he was hunting something. Someone left over from the Final Solution Committee. I never tried to find him. He was where he needed to be. Some men carry memory like a flame. Thorne carried it like a blade. Me? I stayed in the Scour Rim, built a small station out of wreckage and stone. No weapons, no shields, just stories. Pilgrims come now and then. Earthborn, Fral Karathi, even some Zalari exiles. They don't ask for war, they ask for truth. And I give it to them. I tell them what Earth was, what it became, what they took from us, and what we became in return. Sometimes they cry, sometimes they scream, but always they remember. And that's enough. That's all we ever wanted. I've carved over 100 circles into the walls here, each one for a man who died before the whale, each one for a child who was taken, each one for a colony that was erased before it could even be named. Not because we needed revenge, but because history deserves to hurt. It should never be soft, never be neat, never be comfortable. It should be real, raw, like broken hands gripping a blade in the dark, like a scream echoing across empty space. The coalition still exists. They pretend the war never happened. They've rewritten the records. They call it the Earthborn event. Sanitized, controlled, a 5-line entry in their historical databanks. But no one believes it, not anymore, because their children are starting to ask questions about the symbols, about the songs, about the people with black eyes and burning skin who walked through fire and came out whole. The story survived. Not because it was told, but because it was felt. And what of the Dominion? What was left of them? Some still whisper in the corners of the galaxy, trying to regroup, to rebuild. But they are ghosts now, not us, them. Their names have become warnings. Their worlds, ruins, their legacy, shame. And the ones who remember them most are the ones they tried to break. We didn't win. There are no winners in a story like ours. There is only truth. And the truth is that we lost everything. We were stripped, burned, erased. But instead of vanishing, we returned with something older than war, something they could never quantify, never contain, never kill. We returned with memory, not as baggage, as a weapon, as a torch, as a command. So if you're reading this, if you found this station, or heard the wail echoing in the black, or felt the pulse inside your dreams, then you already know what comes next. Not another war, not another rebellion, but something deeper, a decision, to remember, to carry it, to pass it on, because somewhere out there, In the darkness between systems, someone is still trying to forget what they did. And your job is to remind them. We were Earthborn. They took our world. They buried our names. They tried to delete our existence. And all they did was teach us how to never be forgotten again.